everybody. We'd like to open tonight's formal proceedings with a welcome to country. I'd like to introduce Auntie Ali Golding, who recently accepted an appointment as the inaugural Elder-in-Residence at the Faculty of Medicine in this university, the first time any medical school in Australia has made such an appointment. Auntie Ali.
It is a privilege for me to be here tonight, and I just want to thank the people, the organisers, that asked me to do this, and it's always wonderful for me to do a welcome, to welcome each and every one of you to this launching of this important happening tonight in this gathering. So thank you for inviting me. So I stand here tonight, standing and acknowledging my ancestors of the past and the present, and standing in the gap here on this platform tonight on behalf of my Aboriginal people that are in the gathering tonight as well. And on their behalf, as well as mine, and the ancestors of the past and the present, I would like to say to each and every one of you here tonight, welcome. Welcome to the great nation of this great land of the Gadigal people, this wonderful land of the Aurora Nation. So thank you again for having me tonight, and once again, thank you and welcome each one to Gadigal Nation. Thank you.
Chancellor David Gonski, Vice-Chancellor Professor Fred Hilmer, the Honourable Michael Kirby and Johan van Vloten, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, Don Baxter, Chuck and Helga Feeney, Paul McClintock, Michael Kidd, Les Field, Peter Smith, Richard Henry, David Pennington, Neil Blewett, and our old friends Peter and Helen MacDonald. Eminent guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to tonight's celebration, which combines the 25th anniversary of the National Centre in HIV Epidemiology and Clinical Research with the launch of our new identity. I hope you come to know this symbol well and recognise it as a representation of excellence and integrity in infectious diseases research. My name is Andrew Grulich, and I head the HIV Epidemiology and Prevention program at the Kirby Institute. The fact that mine is the only program in the Kirby Institute to have HIV in its title highlights the enormous growth in the scope of our work. The Kirby Institute for Infection and Immunity in Society has come a long way since the foundations for the National Centre were laid a quarter of a century ago. When a young immunologist, David Cooper, was tapped on the shoulder in 1986 by David Pennington to head up the new National Centre, we began a very long journey with HIV. That journey went from initial despair to heartbreak to hope to a feeling these days that victory over that virus might just be possible. HIV is now one of the most intensively researched infectious diseases in human history, and our society is reaping the benefits of that research. Australia's early response to HIV was aided enormously by political clear thinking and risk-taking. For that, we would like to acknowledge Peter Boehm and Neil Blewett, and we are very pleased that Dr. Blewett is with us tonight. We also, at that time, had some of the best and brightest medical scientists in the world, and this enabled the development of links with leading international research groups that have become a cornerstone of our research excellence. That early excellence leads directly to tonight's launch of the Kirby Institute. Our development has taken us well beyond HIV now to a number of infectious diseases. We now encompass 10 research groups and programs with strongly established clinical, laboratory, behavioural and public health research groups and Indigenous sexual health and justice health programs. Viral hepatitis is a key disease of interest in the Kirby Institute, as are a wide range of sexually transmissible infections. Those of you here tonight, and there are many of you who have collaborated with the National Centre over the years, will know that our research work has always been conducted in partnership with those communities most affected. These people are often marginalised and disadvantaged and are at the fringes of the power structures within our society. Frequently, this has led to challenges to both their human rights and their health. This is why we're so pleased that the Honourable Michael Kirby has agreed to lend his name to our new identity. Michael's long-standing commitment to a human rights-based approach to health has built his reputation almost as high as his distinguished years in the law, and over the years he's been an enduring and steadfast friend to the National Centre. We will hear from Michael shortly, but I would ask you to join with me now in thanking him for doing us this honour. Another very welcome guest tonight is Mr. Chuck Feeney, a more recent but no less committed supporter of our work. We welcome Mr. Feeney as a leading light in the field of philanthropy. He shows firsthand how targeted support for research such as ours can be used to persuade governments and other funding bodies to step up to the plate. In his own words, Mr. Feeney believes in making large investments to help solve urgent social problems now, so they are less likely to become larger, more entrenched and more expensive challenges later. That belief sounds like an almost exact description of the Australian response to HIV, and it is now beginning to be a description of the replication of that strategies for viral hepatitis and sexually transmissible infections. I know David Cooper will mention him again in his remarks, but I would like everyone to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Feeney for his support of the Kirby Institute. Now I would like to introduce the President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of New South Wales, Professor Fred Hilmer. Professor Hilmer has been a long-time friend of the National Centre, and we look forward to his continuing support in our new identity as the Kirby Institute. Please welcome Professor Hilmer to the podium.
Thank you, Andrew, and a very warm welcome to the university. It's tremendous, firstly, to see so many of you who David Cooper can certainly draw a crowd, and in particular to see so many of you who were involved with the Centre from its inception and in supporting it in so many ways. We're gathering here tonight to officially rename the National Centre in HIV Epidemiology and Clinical Research, which goes by the catchy title of NCHECR. Anything called NCHECR is a good candidate for renaming. But I think in this case, we're not just renaming the centre, but we're really here tonight to celebrate three related achievements. Now, the first of those achievements, and perhaps the foremost of those achievements, are the achievements of the National Centre, of the Kirby Centre, as it's now to be called, under the leadership of David Cooper. Institutions and individuals are judged by extremes. It's not always fair, but that's the way it goes. You know, if you're Shane Warne, you're judged by that first ball that bowled out Gatting. In universities, you're judged by your best paper and often by your worst paper. And as we reflect on the reputation of this university, one of the extremes at the high end is the National Centre's work, both its academic work and its field work and its clinical work in the field of HIV. And so we're really delighted that we're here to celebrate that. And the history of the National Centre and our ability to have this celebration rests very heavily on the shoulders of David Cooper and on his professorial history. His achievements have paralleled those of the Centre over almost 3 decades, and it's been a broad-ranging involvement. It covers clinical work, basic research, epidemiological research, and membership of advisory groups, involvement in policy, involvement in education. David has the unusual distinction of being involved with all of the 22 currently available antiretroviral drugs. But more impressively, he has published on each drug, an achievement that I'm told is quite unusual even for a clinical scientist. Over the past 8 years, David's also been involved in leadership positions in international HIV research and HIV clinical trials. In 1996, he was the catalyst for the start of HIV-NAT, which was a partnership between NCHECR, IATEC, which is a sister organisation in the Netherlands, and the Thai Red Cross. And I can speak from first-hand experience. David is very difficult to say no to. He heard I was in Thailand. There was a meeting of this group, and it was, irrespective of the fact that this was a holiday, he thought it was a good use of a day of my time to come and talk to the group. So, and it was really an interesting thing to have done and to see firsthand the way this first-rate research is being rolled out into practical applications that's affecting the way doctors in the developing world are treating their patients. Under David's leadership, NCHECA's work has extended to Cambodia, to Indonesia, Papua New Guinea and to Vietnam. So the first thing we're celebrating here is the tremendous contribution, the high point in the research profile of this university that is represented by the outstanding work of NCHECA. The second thing we're here to celebrate is the renaming, and in particular the renaming as the Kirby Institute. Now others who'll follow me speaking will talk about Michael Kirby's contributions that make this a particularly fitting naming. But at this stage I'd just like to add my thanks to Andrews, to you Michael, for allowing us to use your name and your reputation, and I have no doubt that we will build on that with distinction. But wait, there's more. The third thing we're here to celebrate is the almost completion of the funding for the new premises that we are in process of establishing for the centre. In order to do this, we've needed to find some $80 million. Of that, $20 million has come from the Commonwealth, $20 million has come from the state, $20 million has come from the university. You've heard tonight that $10 million has been pledged by Mr. Feeney, and we are seeking and have already commitments towards a matching $10 million that we need to complete. And I particularly want to pay tribute to the wonderful example that Atlantic is setting here in terms of highlighting the contribution that can and needs to be made through philanthropy. The facilities that are underway involve two facilities. One, a set of offices and laboratories here on campus, and secondly, a clinical and related activities site at St Vincent's. And in this regard, I just want to say how valuable our association with St Vincent's has been. At St Vincent's, David's been responsible for building one of the largest services in HIV in the country, and then responding there to the changing face of the epidemic. And I think having a facility at St Vincent's and having research facilities here on campus will equip the centre to go on to greater heights and work of even greater impact. So, three things to celebrate, and given that, no surprise that the liquor is flowing freely and that so many of you are here and in such a good mood. I'd now like to hand over to Don Baxter, who's been a senior statesman of the HIV advocacy field. Mr. Baxter's stepping down after years as the head of the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations, and before that as the head of the AIDS Council of New South Wales. Mr. Baxter's been the voice of the community through some difficult years. He's been a tireless advocate, and his work has contributed directly to the National Centre's successes by forging lasting partnerships between the community and research. Don, if I could call on you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hilmer. Eminent guests, people with HIV, gay men, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, injectors, sex workers, and friends and supporters of all of those people, or us people, and other honoured guests. David asked me to speak about the partnership between the community sector and the NCHECA, and to a degree the clinical sector, and so I felt it was really important to name all of the populations with which the centre has been working over the 25 years. What I just want to do in acknowledging and recognising that partnership is just have a few reflections on particularly its establishment, and then just a few on the achievements of that partnership, the outcomes, and conclude with just a couple of words about the appositeness of naming the centre after Michael Kirby. So if I can just take you back to those early days, even though most of us don't want to go there, 1983, 84, 85, new disease, mainly among gay men, or thought to be at that time, unknown mode of transmission, and quite fearful reactions, understandably, across many communities. Indeed, a reluctance by some, particularly in established medical professions, but to engage with this unknown disease, and partly to engage with the community. The gay community, particularly in the US, but also here, became, of course, a very angry community, young men dying for unexplained reasons. And for clinicians, it's understandable that people, and researchers, it was understandable that people were uncertain about whether to join in. So there were initial tensions in the establishment of that partnership. But I have to say that from 1985, 86, when David was appointed to NCHECA, some of those tensions and those uncertainties played out in the development of the collaborations and the partnerships, which subsequently became so successful. And some of the tensions were researchers actually understanding the gay community and gay men, as most of the people they were seeing with at that time were, but also the gay community had to come to understand, come to terms with, to understand research, and particularly the rigour and the discipline and the distance that's required in clinical trials and good research. But I have to say that under David's leadership, NCHECA rapidly built up the principles and processes of direct community participation in not just the conduct of the trials, but the design and delivery of the trials as well. And to David's credit, that applied in both the clinical trials part of the centre, but also in the epidemiology and surveillance operations. So really we've had 25 years of what I would characterise as creative tension between the community and the clinical and research sectors. And that's exactly the right thing that should have happened. Felt tough at times, but it led to improvements, understandings by both sides. And I think there's a very strong argument that that was done better in Australia than anywhere else, and it has led to some very good results. A quick snapshot. So the key products of that partnership, David and his team rapidly established a national network of trial sites. The community set about educating its members, particularly its members who had HIV, about treatments and about the purpose of trials. These, I think, became particularly important and particularly valuable really probably 8 to 10 years later. What we were able to do and what led by NCHECA was really rapid enrolment in new trials. And the centre was able to retain participation by trial participants at consistently higher levels than any of the other countries involved in these multi-country trials. And this led to a high reputation for Australia as a site for conducting arms of trials. So we were actually able to participate in more trials than many of our comparable countries like Canada, UK, Netherlands. And a key result of that was the earlier access to promising candidate agents. And we have also had a much higher proportion of people living with HIV participating in clinical trials than our comparable countries. So when the good combination drugs came along, 93, 94, we had many people, relatively many more people able to access those drugs initially through trials. What happened then was that many people with AIDS diagnosis at that time, actually got up off their deathbeds over the next 3 months, 6 months, sometimes 3 days. And many of them are still with us today, and quite a few are in this room now, 17 years later. So I think that's an enormous outcome, and it's one that we don't reflect on very much within Australia, but it's been extremely valuable, not just to the people, well, to the people themselves obviously, but also to the country. I think a second outcome that I want to mention, I think which has been crucial to the partnership between NCHECA and the community sector was the reform of the Australian drug evaluation system. The previous regime, for those of who remember, was that the drug evaluation system effectively prevented new agents until they were proven to have no serious side effects by trials conducted in Australia. They would not accept, TGA under its legislation could not accept decisions by other regulatory agencies. The community sector led the campaign for change, but we had the full support of NCHECA and of course many other clinicians in Australia, and the campaign, as many of you know, was really designed and led by our colleague Bill Whittaker. And the key document, I think, which led to that was Professor Peter Bone's analysis and report, which provided the blueprint for change. And so now we have a reform system which benefits not just people with HIV, but a very wide range of Australians who need early access to new agents. So it's been a very productive partnership, as I said, not without its tensions, but tensions can be a creative force. I just want to say a few things about the appositeness of renaming the centre after Michael Kirby. As others have mentioned, Michael has had a lifelong, really, role as a promoter and defender of human rights. Michael saw very early on the challenge that HIV presented to the rights of the marginalised communities and to those infected with HIV. And Michael carries on this work today, and I hope he will take a few vignettes from some of his current roles, one of which is as a commissioner on the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, and a second one is as a member of the Commonwealth of Nations Eminent Persons Group on the future of the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth itself has 30% of the world's population and 60% of the world's people living with HIV infection. Michael formulated early on in the epidemic what he entitled the AIDS paradox, and that is that the health of the uninfected would be best preserved by the protection of the rights of those infected with HIV. Now, this dictum, which among other places he articulated so clearly at the Stockholm International AIDS Conference in 1989, this dictum, when enshrined in national HIV strategies and responses, has indeed proven to be correct, not just in the positive but also in the obverse. Where it has not been done, where it has not been enacted, then it facilitates worse epidemics than need have been. Just one personal reflection, I guess, on the success of the response in New South Wales to HIV arises from these two things, really. One, from the speed with which David and his team recognised that they needed to work with the marginalised communities and working out quickly how to do that, quicker than most other comparable agencies. But perhaps this wasn't really an accident when you reflect on who the leaders were, the clinical leaders were of the early HIV response in Australia. Though many of them, the predominant number, had Jewish heritage. David Cooper, Ron Penny, Alex Wodak, Julian Gold, and others. And perhaps it's not an accident that they actually had an intuitive grasp of how the marginalised communities challenged by HIV could be endangered, particularly in the hysterical context of 1983, 84, 85. So I think renaming the centre the Kirby Institute not only honours Michael Kirby's contribution to human rights in the global HIV response and the Australian one, but it also captures the implicit spirit of the manner in which NCHECA has operated over these 25 years, and I'm sure the Kirby Institute will continue to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to ask you to welcome the founding director of the NCHECA and the inaugural director of the Kirby Institute, Professor David Cooper.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. It's just wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues here. Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, Michael Kirby, Malcolm Turnbull, Chuck Feeney, Peter Smith, Dean of Medicine, honoured guests and staff of the Kirby Institute. I'm very pleased to welcome you all here this evening to mark the transition of our work and our organisation to a new phase. It is no coincidence that this gathering marks not only the launch of the Kirby Institute, but also the 25th anniversary of the National Centre in HIV Epidemiology and Clinical Research, established in the mid-1980s at federal government level in response to the emerging pandemic. There are many people to thank for the life and achievements of the centre. Our heartfelt thanks go, of course, to Michael Kirby for allowing us to use his name for our institute and for indirectly shining his light on our guiding philosophy. Michael's well-known and enduring support for health and human rights, both at home and internationally, fits perfectly with our research focus on those vulnerable communities who make up our patient and client populations, the often disadvantaged groups most likely to suffer the infectious diseases which are the core of our work. As our original, and as of today former, name described it, HIV was our first focus. Our early and essential partners on the research pathway were gay men. They were, as we were, confronted and apprehensive about this new infection which was trampling through their community, and they wanted buy-in into how medical researchers would handle what seemed to begin as a gay-specific disease. The partnership was not always polite or comfortable, but has been immensely beneficial for all of us. There are community representatives on all of our working groups, and their input is valued and respected. For many years now, our institute has included viral hepatitis and other sexually transmitted infections. We have applied the lessons from our collaboration with the gay community to our work with injecting drug users, young people, Indigenous people, people born outside Australia, people in the prison system, sex workers and other groups whose circumstances put them at high risk of infection. Of course, HIV remains both a clear and present danger and a key focus of the work of the Kirby Institute. Sean Emery's program, the Therapeutic and Vaccine Research Program, both leads and coordinates large strategic trials of HIV disease networks, both in Australia and overseas. Andrew Grulich's program, the HIV Epidemiology and Prevention Program, was the first to straddle both clinical and behavioural work in HIV, breaking new ground along the way. The establishment of our two hepatitis programs was a major step in broadening our focus to other infectious diseases. Greg Dawes' Viral Hepatitis Clinical Research Program and Lisa Ma's Viral Hepatitis Epidemiology and Prevention Program bring to this area the breadth of research expertise which we first brought to HIV. Covering the full range of clinical, behavioural, laboratory and epidemiological research in viral hepatitis, these two programs have achieved national significance from their work. Our sexual health program under Basil Donovan and the recently established Justice Health program under Tony Butler both address important components of the infectious diseases landscape. Both Basil and Tony were senior figures in their fields before joining the National Centre, and they have each done a great deal to broaden our focus and allowed us to include more groups affected by infectious diseases of behaviour. An important component in the Australian infectious diseases landscape was addressed by the formation of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Program under James Ward's leadership, which works collaboratively both inside the Kirby Institute and with a network of national Indigenous health organisations. James works in particular with Basil Donovan and with John Caldor's Public Health Interventions Research Group on sexually transmitted infections in both remote and urban Aboriginal communities. John Caldor's group also works in biomedical prevention nationally in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, in addition to our existing programs in Thailand and Cambodia. Underpinning all these groups are three more programs which often provide some heavy lifting. Our surveillance and evaluation program for public health under David Wilson goes from strength to strength, constantly expanding its focus on modelling the spread of infectious diseases while delivering the all-important annual national surveillance analyses. The Biostatistical and Databases program under the quiet stewardship of Matthew Law provides extensive support to all the other programs of the Institute, as does Tony Kelleher in the lab. Tony also seamlessly blends his Kirby Institute team with staff from the St Vincent Centre for Applied Medical Research in his work on the immunopathogenesis of HIV disease. I could tonight go on and describe for you more specific aspects of our research, but instead I'm going to tell you the stories of 5 people with HIV infection. In 1989, in Australia, Sharleen Spiteri was the name, not of a Scottish pop singer, but of a sex worker and drug user who was HIV positive. When AIDS paranoia was at its height, Sharleen said on a popular television program that she tried to get her clients to practice safe sex, but sometimes they wouldn't wear condoms. Sharleen was a walking invitation to moral panic, and the TV interview caused a national furore. The New South Wales government took Sharleen from her flat under police guard and forcibly detained her in a locked AIDS ward. She spent much of the remaining 16 years of her life under 24-hour supervision and became the most expensive public patient in New South Wales history. She died still under a public health order only 5 years ago. Sharleen's story took place against the background of ignorance, panic, homophobia, and for those of us at the coalface, countless funerals. We worked to solve as many of the early puzzles as we could in the lab and the clinic, while desperately trying to keep alive the stream of patients through our doors. A large component of our work was to dispel the fear with as much knowledge and research as we could produce. The second person with HIV infection was the human equivalent of a canary in the coal mine. His name was Colin Loker, and about a year before his HIV infection was diagnosed, he had received a blood transfusion during surgery, our first demonstrable case of HIV infection through transfused infected blood. When I called the blood bank, asking them to trace the donors whose blood had made up Colin's transfusion, I was assured that all the donors would be ladies from the North Shore. And that was 3/4 correct. 3 of the donors whose blood Colin Loker received were indeed nice North Shore ladies. The 4th donor was an equally nice gay man from Darlinghurst, and we confirmed Australia's first case of HIV through the blood supply. This led to the rapid introduction of measures and testing regimes which ensured Australia an uncontaminated blood supply. It also gave impetus to 2 other areas. It highlighted the enormous importance of epidemiology, of the tracking of causes and distributions of infection, and the education campaign for all healthcare workers about infection control guidelines. These 2 fields, epidemiology and infection control, were substantially strengthened through the growing body of knowledge about HIV. The 3rd and 4th people were mother and son. Susie Sidewinder was an American-born actress who was unaware that an early flirtation with injecting drugs had infected her with HIV. Susie and her Australian husband, Vince Lovegrove, had a son, Troy, who was HIV infected. Susie died in 1987, 2 years after Troy's birth. She was the subject of the HIV awareness documentary Susie's Story. For his part, Troy became an HIV awareness campaigner and was the subject of another documentary, A Kid Called Troy, which screened shortly after his death in 1993. Susie and Troy Lovegrove were the public faces of mother-to-child transmission in Australia, a situation which happily now almost never occurs. Thanks to our universal testing of pregnant women and the well-understood mechanisms of treating HIV-infected pregnant women to protect their children, the very rare cases of newborn HIV in Australia, and indeed in the developed world, are usually the children of migrants from high-prevalence countries. The 5th person I want to tell you about was a colleague, Dr. Brett Jindal, one of our many gay physicians drawn to HIV research in the early days, motivated by the desire to help their community. Brett was very bright and exceptionally hard-working, and together he and I slogged through much of those early years of research and were co-authors on the publication which first described the seroconversion illness. Brett died of HIV infection in 1994, and we miss him still. Our work in HIV research, as in viral hepatitis and STIs, has moved on since those days. HIV is one of the most intensively studied and best understood diseases of all times. We now work in large, efficient international collaborations. We have fine-tuned the drug therapies, and in our labs are some of the most expensive and sophisticated pieces of technology that you could find anywhere. We now have patients who have lived so long that we are dealing with age-related conditions in the context of HIV infection. But of course, the holy grail of a vaccine continues to elude us. We cannot afford to keep making and buying the vast quantities of HIV drug therapies needed to keep alive all the people around the world who need them. The only answer is to prevent infection. In the past year or so, we've been able to celebrate some encouraging advances in the area of biomedical prevention, including pre-exposure prophylaxis, the Thai vaccine study, and microbicides, although they can each only be described as modest. We must continue to focus on biomedical prevention as the way forward. In this context, I would like to acknowledge the role of Chuck Feeney of Atlantic Philanthropies. A couple of years ago, Mr. Feeney was looking at projects in New South Wales, having already been welcomed into Queensland and Victoria. He and his scouts identified our work at the National Centre as a match with his interests in supporting excellent medical research which was doing extraordinary things in less than ideal surroundings. Mr. Feeney's style of philanthropy could be described as muscular, with a remarkable track record of leveraging matching funds from government and other sources. He personally persuaded the then Premier of New South Wales, Maurice Yemmer, and the then Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, to each pledge matching funds. He is also keen to encourage local philanthropists to take on projects where their funds might permit very good research to become groundbreaking work. In our case, Mr. Feeney understands that major health threats to the social fabric need a major response, and we thank him for his leadership in this field. To our other great supporter, Michael Kirby, I would like to assure you that we will continue to bring to our work all the determination and focus that you have brought to your pursuit of health and human rights. They are two sides of the same coin, and we are grateful to Michael for his public support as we go forward as the Kirby Institute. I now have only to thank all of those who have collectively helped to bring us to where we are tonight. This journey began for me with my distinguished mentors, Ron Penny, David Pennington, and Peter MacDonald. You may have seen images of a much younger me on this carousel earlier tonight, and now here I am, rather more distinguished myself, particularly around the temples these days. I'm so pleased that the three of you could be here with us tonight. I would also like to thank every member of the Kirby Institute for your contribution. I would like to acknowledge the long and fruitful collaboration with St Vincent's Hospital, the Sisters of Charity, and the St Vincent Centre for Applied Medical Research. And of course, I would like to thank my wife, Dori, whose love and support, together with our daughters, Becky and Ilana, has been crucial throughout my professional journey to this point, the 25th anniversary of the work of the National Centre and the establishment of the Kirby Institute. Thank you all. Now I would like to hand over to the Chancellor of the University of New South Wales, David Gonski, who is also a long-time and valued supporter of our work. Mr. Gonski.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'm conscious that you've been standing for a long time. I want to assure you that chancellors can speak under concrete. So if you need to move a bit or to move around just to get yourselves going, feel free to do it during this speech, because the next one's the one that counts. I wanted particularly to be here for three reasons. I adopt firstly the three things to celebrate that Fred talked about, but three personal things for me. Firstly, I met David Cooper about 10 years ago at a party. I thought he was a GP. He was very quiet, he didn't say much, and basically he said he did a bit of research. It took me 5 years to work out that little bit of research was more than I could possibly contemplate. Of course I would be here tonight to recognise A, I misjudged him because of his modesty, and B, he is one of the gems of this university, and I wanted to personally thank him for what he does. Second, and already we've spoken about the great Chuck Feeney, and also Atlantic Philanthropies, of course I want to thank them. But I don't just want to thank them for the money. I want to thank them for what I think they're starting in Australia. We've been a bit slow, in my view, in Australia to develop the concept of philanthropy. And I believe that people like Chuck, and in particular what they're doing with Atlantic Philanthropies, is going to really start this thing. For a man of his standing to be getting out on the road to help us to match his money is quite outstanding. I pay tribute to him, to David Kennedy and the rest of the staff at Atlantic Philanthropies, and thank them most sincerely. And finally, I want to introduce the man who basically has allowed us to use his name. One of the things I've found about life is they always get a lesser person to introduce a greater person. Have you noticed that? You'll probably need to know about me and nothing to know about him because everybody knows him. Don Baxter's done a wonderful job of introducing him to the 5 or 6 people in the whole room who wouldn't know what Michael's already done. Let me say firstly that Michael, of course, achieved great things in the law. He achieved great things in his chosen profession. But that's just a little bit about Michael. He's done wonderful things on a world scene, which very few in Australia have done, and some of them have been mentioned. But above all, Michael is a human being who cares about people. I remember once there was a bit of a fracas on the front page of a newspaper involving me, and I got this letter on High Court letterhead signed by Michael. I've never forgotten it, and I've kept it. I'd never met him. I didn't really know him except for his wonderful judgments. But what a man. He stands up for his principles, he believes in the underdog, and I felt I was the underdog on that occasion, and basically does a wonderful job. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege for us at this university to be associated with an institute that will bear his name, and I now hope you've done all your jiggling or whatever you need to do, because the main game is for me to introduce Michael Kirby.
Auntie Ayla, I want to assure you that this institute will remember your welcome and will always be there with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We will not be perfunctory. It will be a serious obligation, as it has been in the past, for all vulnerable people, and that includes in the health area the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia. I want to thank the Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor. I remember when I first came to this university, it was in the year 1962. I was a young president of the Students' Representative Council of the University of Sydney, and I would come to the Students' Council here and see John Nyland, who was then the president here, and the Chancellor of the time was Sir John Clancy. The Vice-Chancellor was Sir Philip Baxter. Very powerful and very determined men. They were determined to build here one of the great universities of the world, strong in research, and they and their successors have done that. I thank the Chancellor and the Vice-Chancellor for making it possible for the Institute to accept my name. I know enough about universities to know that that could have been made very difficult, but I am very grateful and I thank them. I also want to thank David Cooper. Now, David is not only a marvellous researcher and scientist and has gathered around him a team of extraordinary people, but he is a very kind man. As it happens, my partner, Johan, who's here with me tonight, was an Ankali. An Ankali is a person who looks after people with HIV by talking with them, by going to their home, by having dinners with them. I was a handbag, and I went along and I saw, because the friend who we were looking after, Fred, had David as his physician. He's 24/7. He's always available to his patients. He's always there. He is a kind, hands-on, good physician. And so he is, if you like, a local doctor. But he's also a local doctor for the world, and he's been a real leader in this epidemic, as we've heard tonight. He's a very much valued friend, and I thank him for the great honour that has been done to me and for all the work he's done. And I want to say to the people who have been working all these years in the National Centre, this is just a transition. The National Centre, which has done such wonderful work, the people who are here who have done such marvellous work in the National Centre, shouldn't see this as an end. It's a continuity, and I'm very proud that my name will be with the Centre in the future, as I have always been with the Centre from the beginning, back 25 years ago. Now, another person who's here is my dad, my father. He's 95 years young. Last week, he did his driving test again, and he got it, which means that at 97 he'll still be driving. But more than that, he came here once before for another occasion, and he was not content to drive. He was not content to park in the streets. He rang up this university and asked for the Vice-Chancellor and requested a parking permit. Such ingenuity is the kind of ingenuity which we're going to boast of in this institute, because those who can get parking permits in this university have got very great powers of persuasion and insight. I remember when David introduced me to the great Jonathan Mann. Jonathan Mann was the first leader of the world's response to HIV in the global program of the World Health Organization. He came out here and David introduced me to him, and that led to my becoming involved in the world activities. I have to say that that was an extraordinary moment in my life, not only because it introduced me to the relationship between society and epidemics and law and epidemics, but because it introduced me to the obligation to get over it and to get over my own sexuality and any problem that it created, and to be more honest and to be more open. And it's a wonderful thing, I think. The only good thing that's come out of HIV, the only good thing amongst many terrible burdens, has been that it's helped us as a society to come to grips with the realities and with the science. Jonathan Mann used to teach, don't base a single policy on prejudice or intuition or dogma. Base it on good science. And once you take that approach, you get a different attitude and a new perspective of the vulnerable groups, the gay men, the people who use drugs, the sex workers, the special vulnerability of women, and the prisoners, the refugees, and others who are vulnerable. And that has been the core of this centre and now the Institute, the vulnerable. And that really is the core of all the great religions of the world, and it's a marvellous challenge for the Institute to keep up the work of the centre and to ensure that the centre continues to look to the vulnerable and to serve them. I have only 3 other short points to make. The first is that we must make sure that governments contribute more to medical research. I want now to say to Malcolm Turnbull, who's here, and I honour him for being here, I want to pay a tribute to John Howard. I didn't always agree with John Howard about everything. I didn't agree with him about everything, but one very good thing John Howard did was he increased enormously the subventions of Australian governments to the National Health and Medical Research Council. And some of those subventions came to our national centre and will come, I hope, to the Institute. And that is a very good thing, because these are obligations of a whole community, and they're obligations to which the government should provide. At the moment, it's flatline, and that may be, of course, because we've had a lot of challenges with floods and other bushfires and other problems in our country. But we've got to make sure that the spirit that was behind Mr. Howard's contributions is continued. And that should be a message we should, as citizens, send out to governments. Governments live in a very challenging time. Governments are now very vulnerable. All governments are very vulnerable. And that's a message that we've got to get out. People want support for medical research, and that is something which we expect from the Australian government. Secondly, like everyone else, I want to say thanks to Chuck Feeney. I want to say thanks to him because this is a first tonight. Normally, Chuck Feeney, as those who've read his biography will know, Chuck and Helga keep it very quiet. They're not public people. They're not publicity hounds. They keep it to themselves. They are just generous. I want to explain to you, Chuck, why we have not had this culture of philanthropy in Australia. It goes back to our history. It goes back to the early years of the 20th century when Australia and New Zealand became very dependent on government to do things. We just thought that was what we should do, tax relatively highly and get government to look after us. We were the first of the welfare societies, and that is our culture, and it has to be changed. And the great contribution Chuck Feeney has made is not only to make a very generous gift to this institute, but has also gone out of his way to encourage other people of wealth in this country to realise that giving's good, and that giving is something that people should do, and above all, they should do it in their lifetimes so they can see the product of their gifts, not leave it to their relatives to challenge it in the courts and see whether or not it gets through after they're gone to their rewards. And so I say to Chuck, thank you. You are an example, and we're grateful not only for your gift, but for your coming here tonight and putting up with us, thanking you all the time, and also giving an example to Australians. He is the most generous donor in Australia, and he's not even an Australian, and it's a wonderful thing. And this isn't the only university, so many others. We need more of them, more of them. Those of you in the audience with big checkbooks, get ready, because we're going to be after you. You've got to give matching funds. This is not we're not going to mess with you, we're just going to tell you what has to be done. And thirdly and finally, one of the wonderful things that Jonathan Mann used to do was to gather groups of people at Lake Annecy near Geneva in France, just over the border, and the groups always had a large sprinkling of Nobel laureates. Jonathan in those early days thought, if we can only get the best brains in the world for this particular epidemic, we can conquer it. And he said, and Luc Montagnier, who later got a Nobel Prize for identifying the HIV virus, they said, we will have the cure and we will have the vaccine in 20 years. I heard it myself. We don't have the cure and we don't have the vaccine, but one day we will, by the ingenuity of science and research, of medical research. One day, soon, we will. And this epidemic, HIV, and other conditions, the viral conditions, will be banished to a footnote to history. But the most important thing I learned there was from a Nobel laureate. His name was David Baltimore, and he is now the president, or was until recently the president of Caltech. And he was a scientist who was working in the inquiry into monkeys. He had an interest in a strange retrovirus in West African chimpanzees. And that had no significance whatsoever when he was doing it. When he started, no one knew that HIV was just around the corner. He was just like many of the people in this room, a very curious, inquiring, highly intelligent mind. He was looking at an issue because it was a puzzle. And that's a very important thing for us tonight to realise. You can't just turn on a tap and say, we want the solutions. Sometimes solutions pop out laterally. Life is full of paradoxes. And that was the lesson that David Baltimore taught me. And it's a lesson we have to say to public philanthropy and private philanthropy. It can't be done by order. It will sometimes take time. It will sometimes take serendipity. But the dividends will be great, and they will be dividends for human life, human happiness, and kindness to each other, which is what we should try to achieve. So I thank the university and I thank the Institute for adopting our name. I understand that one factor was it's a short name, it's a little name. It's easy to spell it, and it's very quick to identify it. Just as well they didn't name it after my partner, Johan Anton van Vloten. But I thank you all for coming tonight. I thank you for honouring me. I thank the workers, the real workers who are out there who've been standing all this time. I appreciate the honour of associating me more closely with the Institute, and I'm not going anywhere soon. Keep thinking about my father.
Michael, thank you so much for those kind and very inspiring words, and we certainly do look forward to continuing our long relationship for a very long time yet. I'd also like to thank our signer for tonight, Jemina Napier. And I would like to thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate the transition to the Kirby Institute, to acknowledge our history and to look forward to many years of research achievement. The food and wine are going to keep flowing freely for quite some time, so please don't rush off if you don't have to, and enjoy the hospitality. Thank you very much.